Okay, I think we can get started. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, country focal points for S36 monitoring, colleagues from the UN agencies, and other friends and partners interested in S36 monitoring. I welcome all of you to the second global workshop on integrated monitoring of S36 on water and sanitation. My name is Will Reedhead. I am the Global Monitoring Officer at UN Water based in Geneva, and I'm the coordinator for IMI SDG 6. And I'm joined here today by my colleague, Maria Schade, who's based in southern Germany. And the two of us will be leading you through the kickoff session of the second global workshop. This session is the first of 4 separate sessions that we'll be doing starting now, and the last 3 will be in the first week of February, and we'll be talking about what that means in a bit. But I'd like to start us off by sharing a few, hopefully inspire you. So the first one is 8.2. This number, 8.2, is the average number of global indicators out of 11 that countries have reported in the 2020 data drive. That is up from 0 in 2015 and 7.2 in 2019. So 8.2 out of 11 is actually really good. The next exciting number is 130. That's the number of countries that have designated overall focal points. And I'll tell you a bit more about what that means a bit later, but that's up from only 30 countries a few years ago. The third is 193. 193 is the number of countries that reported data in 2020, which is basically all member states, all UN member states in the world. Maria, can you advance there we go, 193, okay? The next one is 1,702. That's the total number of data points that we managed to get during the most recent data drive. And that's a lot of data points, and this is what we use to produce the 2020 summary progress update, which was the main input from UN Water into the PGA high-level meeting on water, which is the first high-level global meeting on water in 44 years. So these data, which came from all of you, fed into that brief. And the final exciting number is 2,146, which is the total number of indicator-specific focal points that we have in all countries of the world. So between the 130 countries with overall focal points and the 2,146 technical focal points, we have a lot of focal points. And you folks are the ones that we're talking to now. So again, welcome to this workshop. Next slide. So this workshop is, as I said, the first of 4 sessions that we'll be doing now and in February. And these are what we're aiming for from these sessions, the expected outcomes. The first one, like the workshop that we had in 2017, is to exchange good practice on a number of key topics across countries. We've learned a lot during these last few years. We are the experts, all of you are the experts. This is a chance for us to share what we know with each other. So that's the first outcome. The second one is we, as the Integrative Monitoring Initiative, are interested in hearing what you think about monitoring in general, about support that we have provided to you, what's worked, what hasn't worked during the last few years. So the second one is reflections and feedback on past work. The third outcome is to identify the needs and priorities for future monitoring. So we're approaching the end of our second phase, and we'll be entering our third phase. We're planning for the third phase. We'd like to hear from you what you think your country needs to continue advancing S36 monitoring and what we might be able to do to help. Then lastly is that we want to see increased levels of dialogue between focal points within each country. And I'll tell you a bit about country monitoring teams and what they may be able to do. But the idea here in this workshop is to provide a platform and a process where we'll see dialogue between the focal points within each country. Next slide, please. So I mentioned there's 4 sessions, so you can see these 4 sessions here. So today is a kickoff session. So we have 2 hours together. The first 1 hour will be focused on giving you a little bit of a background on IMI. Some of you have been with us for quite a while, so you'll know this. It'll still be good to hear what we've been up to most recently. Others may be hearing this for kind of the first time. That will be followed by an explanation of what we're calling the voluntary country assignment, which is a chance, as I mentioned, for focal points within a country to get together and talk about a few key questions, which will then feed into the other 3 sessions of the workshop. That's the first hour. Then the last hour is an optional training on data communication. We've got lots of data in our countries, but how do we analyze and package that data in a meaningful way for policymaking and decision making? So we'll be having a 1 hour session on talking about how we might be able to do that. So that's today's session. Then the remaining 3 sessions are on the first week of February. So it's the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th of February, 2022. The first session is going to be doing a stock taking of S36 monitoring to date. So that's what I mentioned about reflecting on what's worked and what hasn't worked during the last few years, including the support that the UN has provided. The second session will be looking in more depth at the data for policy and communications. So we'll be having some case studies on how data is used at different levels. We'll be having some breakout discussions on what it means to us, what our practices are for data and communication. And finally, we'll be getting feedback from the same external communications expert who's going to be doing the training today. So some feedback on some examples of communications of data. And then the third session, which is on the 10th of February, is going to be looking to the future. So needs and priorities for the period of 2023, 2026 for S36 monitoring, but also a really interesting exercise, which we call real-time consulting, where you get to identify important questions, important topics that you'd like advice on related to your own monitoring of SDG 6. So we'll be the participants will be advising the countries. Very exciting. So that's the workshop at a glance. Next slide, please. So now this ends the welcome from me. I'd like to hand over the floor now to my colleague Maria Shada, who's going to start by telling us about the practicalities for today's session. Maria.
Thanks, Will. And thanks to everyone being here. It's really nice to see you all. Let's start with some practicalities. In this session, we're offering interpretation in Arabic and Russian, and you can access this by clicking on this icon. And here you can select Arabic, Russian, or English channel. And the English channel is useful if someone else from the floor is making an intervention in Russian or Arabic. And then we're very excited about this virtual workshop as it allows us to invite every one of you. However, we do miss the personal interactions of a face-to-face meeting. So we will try to make this as lively as possible, and we also invite you to really try to take active part in this. So you are, if your internet connection allows for it, it would be great if you can turn on your video camera. And also please make sure to check your name and change it if it's needed. It would also be great if you present yourself, name, affiliation, and country in the chat. And in the chat here, you can of course also ask any questions or comments during these sessions. We will be having two opportunities for question and answers. And if you would like to make an intervention, please raise your hand. And when we ask you to take the floor, please turn on your video and your microphone. And since there are very many people in this meeting, we also ask you to please remember to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. So that's here. And then I thought we would start with some polls. So I'm sure you're all excited to know where all the other who all the other people that are in this workshop are. So I thought we would start by doing a poll where you can please respond from which region you are. And we will just give it a bit of time so everyone can click their region. And then afterwards, I will ask each region to kind of introduce themselves. So I will call on each region, and when I do, please, all participants from this region, put on your video camera and your mic and say hi to everyone. And we will then also make sure to take some photos as to remember this, this kickoff session. So that's great. I'll see a lot of responses still coming in. So just give it a few more seconds before ending the poll. And there we go. And I hope by now you can see see the results of the poll. There's a lot of people from Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa, and also from the Asian subregions. So if everyone from Asia, from a region in Asia, if you could please put on your video and perhaps also your microphone to make sure that your photo come up at top, and then maybe just wave a bit. And then we will be taking some photos. So everyone from the Asian, sorry, and also Oceania, Asia and Oceania, if you can please put on your videos and we will take a photo. That's great. There's a lot of people with cameras on. And I'll give my colleagues a bit of time to take this photo. And then let's switch to the African region. So if everyone from the African region could please put on their video and microphone and just wave, and we will take a photo of you too. Great. And please present yourself too if you haven't in the chat. That's great. And then let's move on to the European region. And if there are any other regions that I haven't mentioned yet, I think the Americas are still asleep. But so please, everyone from Europe, if you can put on your video camera and maybe just wave, we will take a photo of you too. Great. Thanks so much. Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have a video right now. My name is Alexandra. I'm from Bulgaria and I'm working at National Statistical Institute.
That's great. So please introduce yourself using the chat too. So we will then move on. Thanks so much, everyone. And if you have the internet connection, feel free to keep your videos on. But please mute your microphone. So we will then continue. I have another poll used to check, oh, there we go. To check which is your favorite SDG target. Used to know a bit who's here, since we're inviting all focal points for SDG6. So I'll launch the next one. If you could please indicate in this poll which is your favorite SDG target. And we will give it a bit of time. And I'll then put on my presentation again. So we're getting a lot of responses. It seems to be fairly even. Now I'll end the poll in the interest of time, and you can see the results. So that's great. We actually have people interested in all of the SDG targets. So that's great. I will then continue with the presentation. I think we're now ready to look at this brief overview of the joint work that the UN is doing to support countries monitor water and sanitation in the framework of the 2030 agenda, and to report on global progress towards SDG6. And I don't need to tell you anything about SDG6, I think you're experts. But I just wanted to recall the purpose, why we're doing all this work. And on this slide, I have pasted, I've copied and pasted from the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the actual text, from the section on follow-up and review, which is something all the UN member states have committed to do. And the purpose of this follow-up and review process, it's to track progress, ensure that no one is left behind, promote accountability, learn and mobilize support. And actually, I think this also very, in a good way, summarized the purpose of the global indicators and why we are collecting the data, why we need the data. And then on the right-hand side, I think there's a nice summary of why countries are responsible to report data, and also the dire need to build capacity building in countries to strengthen national data systems, and also the role of the UN to support this work. Then we have the 11 global indicators. You can see an overview of them here. And here you can also see the 8 UN agencies and the 2 other international organizations that are in charge of these indicators, or they have been developing methodologies. They are regularly contacting you about data requests and providing different types of capacity building support. And they are also reporting on global progress. And really early on, and since water and sanitation, it's such a cross-cutting issue on the one hand side, and then on the other hand, it's something that's often dealt with by very many stakeholders across many different institutions. And therefore, these custodian agencies really early on decided to join forces and establish this UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative to capture synergies across and have a more efficient outreach and to promote integration. And IMI also at the national level, we focus on promoting intersectoral collaboration and data integration. And the work, it's possible thanks to the generous supports of our donors. The overarching goal of IMI, it's to speed up, accelerate progress towards SDG6 by providing evidence for policy and decision making. And we do that through 2 objectives. So the first one, supporting countries collect, analyze, and report SDG6 data, and that's really our core business. And then the second one, to basically take this data to policy and decision maker, or help take this data to policy and decision makers at different levels and present it in a way that they can act on it. We have divided the work into 4 phases. The first one focused on establishing a global data baseline for the different indicators. The second one was to promote country ownership and to scale up the reporting. And then in the third and fourth one, we're increasingly focusing on integration and data use. And then within each phase, we basically have 4 steps, 1 for each year, where we start with preparations and capacity building activities, and then continue with global data collection, followed then by validation of data and analysis and progress reporting. And then in the 4th year, it's basically feeding these findings and the data to various global processes and also to prepare for the next phase by taking stock of the work to date. And currently, we're at the end of the third year of the second phase. And that's exactly why we're doing this workshop now, to be able to gather your feedback. And we also have, we're also undergoing external review. And I think many of you have been contacted by these external reviewers who's asked you to fill in a survey. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to really encourage you to participate in this survey. Last year, I think actually all of you, or many of you, participated in the second global data drive, the 2020 data drive. And of course, it was very difficult circumstances, very special circumstances due to the pandemic. And I mean, many of you were working under complete lockdown or working from home as best that you could. And we were really, as the pandemic came, the agencies had to really quickly redesign their support. And basically all the face-to-face activities were replaced with virtual activities instead. On the positive side, the agencies report on a lot of unprecedented engagement in these processes. And they were also happy to see that, through the virtual format, it was possible to reach, a broader audience and also deeper into the countries. And that's, of course, a very good thing. And then while the agencies were working on their specific indicators, we also had a number of joint activities to support the 2020 data drive. And I just wanted to highlight one of them, which is this focal point database, where we gather all the focal points from all the countries across indicators. And this is really to promote, it's like a first step to promoting intersectoral collaboration in countries, as it enables one focal point in one country to find out about the other focal points in that country. And then if we look at the results, as Will mentioned in the beginning, we are now seeing that the average UN member state can report on 8.2 of the indicators, and that's really great. And you see that we actually, on this map, you can see how many of the indicators that each country or area is reporting on. And yeah, it's great results, and thank you so much for all your efforts to make this happen. But of course, I mean, we do know that there's a lot of data gaps remaining, especially for the indicators that rely on in situ data. So for example, water quality and groundwater. And we're actually, so that's, it's a big question how to address these data gaps. And as you all know, it's really, in some cases, really substantial investments needed within countries to address these. In the country assignment that we'll present to you in a bit, there's actually one part where we ask you to discuss, how to address these data gaps. And we will also be discussing it in the first day of the regular workshop in February. So we will definitely get back to this. But yeah, this map, it's from the S36 Data Portal. And I actually wanted to take the opportunity to just show how you can use this S36 Data Portal, which gathers the top data on all of the SDG6 indicators. And for example, we have these country snapshots where we gather all the top data from a specific country in one place. So it might be a convenient place to start if you want to look at it. If you want to look up what reporting your country did. This is how the interface looks, and you're just basically, identifying your own country and clicking on it. So in my case, Sweden. And then if you scroll down, you see the results for all the indicators. And you can also click on these circles or scroll down and you'll see more detail. And then this year we have been publishing a number of reports outlining the current status and acceleration needs across all of SDG6. I won't speak to that, but just to highlight that they are there for your convenience. And we also have various communications materials that support this. And you're really welcome to visit this page and download these things. In September, we also had a series of indicator-specific webinars where we digged in a bit deeper into each of the topics. These were really well attended, but if you missed them, you have the chance to look at them again. You can see the link here. And yeah, you can look at them at your own pace. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight how we're using the data that you're providing at the global level. So of course, every year the custodian agencies are asked by UNSD to provide data, which is fed into the high-level political forum. We also have the annual moments of the Young Water Global Acceleration Framework. And then now coming up is this very important midterm review of the International Decade for Action on Water for Sustainable Development. It takes place in 2023 with a big UN conference. And before that, there's this rigorous preparatory process with a lot of regional and global meetings. And in these ones, that's a really important venue for us to provide updated feedback, updated evidence, and using the data that you have reported. And then, of course, in July 2023, there's the next in-depth review of SDG6 at the high-level political forum. And with that, I'm done with this introduction. Before handing over to my colleague Will to introduce the monitoring assignment, I just wanted to check if anyone, do you have any questions or comments that you would like to share? Please raise your hand if you do. No one? Okay, that's good. So at least it keeps us on time. I can't see any raised hands. So then over to you, Will.
Thanks a lot, Maria. Okay, I will now share my screen. Okay, are you seeing this? Maria, is it okay? Yeah, all right, great.
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot. 1 second, please. Sorry, I was having some background noise problems. So for this part of the session now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're calling this voluntary assignment for the country monitoring teams. This is an assignment that we have already shared with all of you by country. That is 3 or 4 sections that we would suggest. It would be great if you could convene the different monitoring focal points in your country to discuss. Before I go into the assignment, though, I'd like to give a bit of a context reminder of what we mean by country monitoring teams. So there are different sorts of focal points, and each of you, or most of you in this meeting, are one or more of these types of focal points, and hopefully you are at least somewhat aware of that status. So here, the first type we have are what we're calling indicator-specific technical focal points. Sometimes we call them TFPs. So these are experts in a country who are the people who are responsible for getting data on a particular indicator. So these tend to be technical people. There may be more than one of them for each indicator. And of course, there are 11 indicators in total. So a country will have a range of technical focal points. And these are the people who are typically interacting with the UN custodian agencies during the data collection exercises and are the ones that are the main audience, the main target group for any capacity building. We also have the National Statistical Office. So as per the structure of the Agenda 2030 and the global indicators, the NSOs have the official final sign-off on any official data coming from within a country. So whereas the TFPs are usually the sources of the data, it's the NSO who basically gives it the official stamp of that country and it says that they're okay with it going into the global data system. And in many countries, most countries, we have also overall focal points. So these are the people who are, they may be a technical person as well, but they're kind of the coordination point for bringing together all the different technical people and trying to see that things move smoothly and to encourage collaboration across the different technical people. And this is the part where the idea of integration really comes into play, where we try to bring together all these separate sectoral expertise areas into one holistic picture. Okay, so this is what we talk about as intersectoral monitoring or integrated monitoring. And these overall focal points are also the initial contact for any outreach between the initiative and a given country. So if we have some updates, it goes to that overall focal point, who then in principle will be sharing it with technical focal points. This figure shows you kind of how we see this falling together in terms of kind of an organogram. So each of these pink rectangles, that is one particular indicator. Okay, so you might have a rectangle on wastewater or a rectangle related to water use efficiency. Within each of these areas, you can have a whole range of expertise, people, different ministries, different sectors, different types of stakeholders, research organizations, private sector, a whole bunch of different representatives there related to that indicator. But on top of that rectangle, so to speak, that's where the technical focal point is. So this is one person or maybe a couple of people who's overall responsible for that indicator. But we understand that they may be working with a much larger group of people behind the data point. And then looking further up, so you see we have separate columns for each of the indicators. And then kind of above that is where that overall focal point would sit. And their job is trying to kind of overall coordinate this and to bring things together into a bigger picture. But of course, we also have the National Statistical Office, which, as I said, is the final sign-off in all official statistics from that country. Then outside of that box, so those things together, so the overall focal point, the NSOs, and the technical focal points, that group together is what we're calling the country monitoring team, or sometimes referred to as the intersectoral monitoring team. Okay, so this is the group that may or may not exist. I mean, it may not be something you're aware of in your country. It's something that we've been trying to promote over time to get people in the country to work together more and more. Some countries have this very formalized. It's actually an official committee that's been designated by the president, very high level, very formalized. In other countries, it's much less formal. It's just a meeting of colleagues who like to talk about monitoring. And other countries don't have anything at all in terms of intersectoral coordination. And then looking on the left, that's us. So the blue box is the Integrative Monitoring Initiative, which is made up of the UN Water Technical Advisory Unit, which is myself and Maria and Sarah, and others who are not involved in the initiative, plus the 8 UN custodian agencies. So the UN custodian agencies are in direct contact with the technical focal points, and the UN Water TIU tends to work with the overall focal points. So that's kind of how we see the structure going. And then this last little box. The last box here is kind of the long-term objective for what we're talking about with integrated monitoring. So we'd like to contribute to an integrated monitoring process in countries where cross-sectoral coordination and collaboration improves the availability, accessibility, and integrated analysis of high-quality data for policy and decision-making. So basically, we believe that it's important to bring together all these different technical expertise under one roof to have this integrated monitoring that then feeds into national and subnational level policymaking. This is our favorite picture. You've probably seen this before, but it's just underlying that you can have great sectoral data. If you look on the left, you see those polygons that are stacked nicely into columns. So it looks good on a sector by sector basis. But of course, they're in silos. They're not collaborating together. But we realize that if you do integrated monitoring, you can pull together all those pieces into something much more informative. And here you see a picture of our famous monitoring duck. But the idea is that by pulling together all of this under one roof into this country monitoring team or this intersectoral monitoring team, the whole is become greater and more meaningful than the sum of the parts. And that's what feeds most efficiently into policymaking. So that's just the background on these country monitoring teams. And I'm giving this to you because the exercise, this voluntary assignment, is requesting that these teams convene and they look at these questions together. So for those of you who actually have an operational team already, it should be relatively straightforward. But for others of you who've never really gotten together before, it may be maybe the first time, maybe a bit of a challenge. But just as a reminder, when we did the first global workshop in 2017, we had also had a homework assignment. In this case, it was country posters. You can see some example here, deliberately blurred out to protect the innocent, but you can see an example of these country posters where a given country, so Switzerland has one here, Ecuador, Nepal, where they pulled together their data across all the indicators and identified certain lessons, and they answered certain questions, and they summarized it nicely in a poster, which was then shared at the physical workshop in The Hague. So of course, we're not having a physical workshop this year, and we're not doing country posters, but we are asking these monitoring teams to answer these questions. So I'll tell you a little bit now about these questions. So first of all, in terms of the process, okay, so the request is, and again, this is voluntary. So if you don't have the time or you don't think it's feasible, you don't have to do this. But the idea is that each country team should convene all the SDG 6 focal points in that country. Okay, so that's the technical focal points, the NSOs, the overall focal points if you have them. They should all convene. It can be as simple as a 1-hour video conference, or you can actually, if conditions permit, you can bring people together physically and have a day-long meeting if you want. It's recommended that each focal point looks at the questions in advance. They may prepare their initial answers, which they're prepared to discuss in this group meeting. It would be useful to have a rapporteur to this meeting. That could be the overall focal point, or it could be someone else that you designate. And we'd request that you summarize the group answers in this PowerPoint template that we've sent you. So you can add additional slides if you need to. But of course, you're welcome to do this in any format that you find convenient. And then ultimately, we'd like you to send this completed assignment to us at that email address by the 31st of January. So that's just before the remaining 3 sessions. And then these answers, first of all, we will synthesize them as much as possible to feed them into the discussions in the February sessions. But we would also be using the results in different ways, and they may appear on our website. They might appear in the workshop report. It would be really useful for us in quite a few ways. Some of these information will feed into the phase 3 planning. Maria mentioned the midterm review that we're going through. So we're going through that evaluation of IMI. So that will help us with the evaluation as well. Okay, so that's the process for the assignment. And these next 3 slides are the actual questions. 4 slides actually. So the first one is about your experience to date on S36 monitoring and reporting. Okay, so this will feed into session 2 on the 8th of February. So the question is to please reflect on the work on S36 monitoring in your country during the last few years. And below are some questions that you could consider. You don't have to talk about all of these. You can talk about other things too, but these are here to kind of stimulate your thinking. So how did you organize data collection across all the different institutions in your country? Did you discuss work with other focal points? Were you able to report the data that the UN was asking for? And if not, why not? What were the challenges you faced? What did you think about the process? What value did this give? Et cetera, et cetera. So these are the sort of questions that we would like the monitoring teams to discuss for the first topic. The second one is talking about how you use the data to inform policy, because ultimately that's what really matters. It's not just about pulling together numbers, but it's actually what we do with them. So this question requests that you reflect on how the collected data and resulting analysis are used for policymaking and other purposes at various levels within your country. So you might want to think about what were the main uses of data, what policy processes benefited the most from the data, what types of analyses are you doing with the data, who are you sharing the data with, how do you share the results, what are the challenges, etc. So this will be feeding into the session 3 of the February workshop. Then the last topic is about the needs and priorities for the future. So based on your experience and the challenges that you're aware of, what are the needs and priorities for future water and sanitation monitoring in your country? So what are you doing to address data gaps? What are the areas that you'd like to see improve in your country for monitoring? Which of these are specific to a particular indicator and which of them are kind of cross-cutting things that affect all monitoring? Okay, so these are some of the questions you might consider. So those are the main 3 topics. There's a fourth one, which is optional. Of course, these are all optional. The exercise is voluntary, but we're also very interested in seeing examples of how you are currently communicating data. So if you have any of these, we'd love for you to share them. So these could be examples of briefs to policymakers. These could be examples of press releases. They could be examples of presentations that have been given to different audiences. Anything you have you think is a good example of using S36 monitoring data for comms, we would love to see it. So if you want to do this part of it, you can send us some examples. And this will also feed into the session 3 in February, where we're going to be talking about communications of the data. So that's it. Those are the 3 or 4 topics for this voluntary assignment. And as I mentioned, the idea is for the country monitoring teams to get together and talk about these questions and then to submit this to us in preparation for the February sessions. It's meant to be an informal process. And I recognize that in some cases, it may be easy to convene a group. In other cases, it may not be as easy, but we'd be really excited if we could give this a try. And with that, I'd like to stop and open the floor to any questions that people may have on the process. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see any people when they raise their hands. So if you have any questions, if you'd like to intervene, you can raise your hand and we can call you. Okay, I see Danka from Slovakia.
Correct.
You have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. I'm coming from Slovakia and I'm overall focal point for SDG 6. Thank you, Phil, for presentation. It was very nice. I like the schematic organogram or boxes which you made. One alert and maybe already some experience from a background from the ground is that in that boxes you display the positions, let's say technical experts and the overall focal point and then statistical office. But we in the ground, we see these people, and people are moving, you know, are coming, leaving, dying, changing the job. So this is very fluid at the local level, I would say. So whenever there is some change, we need to start from again and again. So probably the biggest how to say effort which we do is on the specific technical experts who collect data, who are in charge of monitoring. Indeed, they are using that for very different purposes, for water plans, for budgetary purposes, for the response to the government, where we need to increase the investments or so. However, let's say the monitoring is somewhere at the last in the queue of what we are doing. So I very appreciate such a exchange and this seminar that it can give me a touch, and I'm looking forward to see other experience from other countries, how they are dealing with the schemes where we sometimes we have to speak to 11 agencies at the UN orbit, let's say, but we have many more purposes at the ground. Thank you.
Thanks, Danka. And you've touched on, I think, what's probably the biggest ongoing challenge that we all face in the UN is keeping these contacts up to date. That's also what I see as one of the important roles of the overall focal point, is to give updates when these people change. Hopefully not too many of them are dying, but yes, it's really a very fluid environment. And yes, I really like actually how you summarize kind of the sequence of priority with the group, because I think a really healthy functioning country team is using the data for their own purposes, and they're not so worried about the UN reporting. The UN reporting is just something that can be done when the data is ready, but the real value is how it feeds into your own national processes. So thanks for highlighting that. Okay, anyone else? Hands up. No more hands up. So I mean, this presentation today was really just to highlight about the assignment. So if you do have any more questions about the voluntary assignment in coming weeks, you can feel free to write to us, and we will help you out. And of course, if you have any questions about the monitoring team itself, we'd be happy to give some advice there too. Still no more hands. Well, I guess I answered everyone's question before they even had questions. That's great. Just also a reminder, a bit of a plug, that there is this midterm evaluation of IMI ongoing, and you would have all received a request to fill out an online survey. So if you haven't completed that survey, yeah, it would be really great if you could. I think you have another 4 or 5 days. I see a hand now, so I'd like to call on Sergey. Oh, your hand's gone now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you hear me?
You go ahead.
Before of all, I would like to thank for this meeting. Sorry for my English. I'm lost 2 years and cannot communicate with English people. 2 years pandemic.
I'm just jumping in. You can speak Russian because we do have interpretation. So if you want to speak Russian, you can do so. And everyone else need to put on their English interpretation channel.
Хорошо, я буду говорить по-русски. Я знаю, какая-то трудная проблема переводить, поэтому буду строить фразы попроще. Еще раз хочу поблагодарить за организацию этой встречи. Она очень полезна для общения, потому что то, что мы ведем всю работу по переписке, это не отражает тех некоторых деталей и нюансов, которые мы можем использовать при личной встрече. То, что сейчас был доклад и не было вопросов по докладу, это совсем не означает, что доклад был очень прекрасный в отношении вопросов. Доклад действительно был прекрасный, но у нас вопросы могут возникнуть только после того, наверное, когда мы детально ознакомимся с этой презентацией, может быть, возникнет множество вопросов. И тогда у нас появятся вопросы не только к самой презентации, но еще к тем действиям, которые мы должны осуществлять в своей работе. Конечно, тот факт, что наблюдается и текучесть кадров, текучесть людей, с перехода с места на место, у нас часто меняются координаторы в странах. И, конечно, новому координатору всегда трудно вникать в ту работу, которая проводилась до него. Мне очень нравится, что есть такой сайт, который будет насыщаться информацией по мере нашей работы. Вот то, что на одном из слайдов был хороший рисунок из разных треугольников сложить один пазл. Я думаю, вся информация будет где-то будет обновляться, а где-то будет предоставляться заново. То есть та информация, которой не было, вдруг начинает поступать. И в этом плане мне очень нравится то, что создана оперативная база по информации, с которой могут работать вновь пришедшие координаторы, основываясь на всем том, что было сделано до них. И я прочитал в чате, что после нашего семинара все презентации будут опубликованы на странице в электронной форме, которыми можно будет уже ознакомиться более детально. И еще одно, к чему очень трудно привыкать, когда у нас организовывались семинары, так сказать, при личном участии, человека не отрывали от работы. А так как мы работаем сейчас в онлайн, то ко мне, как к сотруднику организации, начальство начинает дергать. Я не знаю, как перевести это на английский. Это к переводчикам такой вопрос. Но им это хорошо знакомо. И поэтому мы иногда отключаемся, выходя на выполнение своих текущих рабочих дел, и возвращаемся снова, чтобы принять участие в работе семинара. Это одна из отрицательных сторон онлайн-семинаров. Ну, это в качестве такого замечания, с которым все мы сталкиваемся. Когда участвуешь в онлайн-семинаре, начальство думает, что мы немножко бездельничаем. Поэтому я думаю, что вы поймете нашу ситуацию участников. Когда мы работаем на онлайн-семинаре, то мы иногда выходим, отлучаемся для выполнения текущих дел. Ну и по закону Мерфи, вы знаете этот закон, что всегда приходят 2 или 3 работы одновременно. Поэтому я заканчиваю уже, ожидаю публикации на сайте всех презентаций. И, возможно, по некоторым из них будут вопросы уже в переписке или с авторами, или с организаторами. Спасибо большое. Спасибо переводчикам, потому что мне так получилось быстрее говорить. И им спасибо за то, что перевели. Спасибо.
Thanks a lot, Professor Myagkov, and it's nice to see you, see your face. We've exchanged many emails over the years. I don't think I've ever seen your face before, so it's nice to meet you. I share all those observations. I never would have imagined we'd be able to do a big global workshop like this online. We actually had lots of technical problems with webinars we tried to do a few years ago. They just never worked very well. And yet it's remarkable how well these IT companies have stepped up during the pandemic to create these platforms that work really well. So I'm pleased that this is even a possibility. I also miss the personal interaction. And what I'm actually missing this morning as I got up early to prepare for this was going to the hotel dining room and having a great breakfast in a nice hotel instead of having a bowl of cereal in my kitchen. Little things about these big meetings that you miss, and hopefully we will have a chance to have them again. But on the bright side, we're able to reach a lot more people. If those of you who went to the Hague workshop, we were limited, and we had 175 people physically there, which is great, but we were only able to invite the overall focal points because we couldn't have everybody there. It was just not practical and it was expensive. But having an online meeting like this one, we're able to actually reach out to a lot more people. And we saw this during the indicator webinars we had a couple months ago. They had really great turnout, much more than we would have had with the face-to-face meeting. And likewise, we expect the same here. So thank you for those observations on the process. We have 3 minutes left, I think, since we don't have more questions. Oh, okay. I'd like to call on, I see Ernst from Austria. Ernst, it's nice to see you. How are you?
Oh, hi, Will. Everything fine, thank you.
Great,
Welcome to everybody. My name is Ernst Überreiter. I am from Austria, from the Federal Ministry responsible for water and SDG 6 reporting. And I am the SDG 6 focal point for Austria. Thank you very much for all these very good presentations that are very helpful for further process, also to collect our SDG 6 data and make progress in our reporting, and also showing our data all over the world. Great respect from my side. I followed the process, I think, from the beginning, and it's great to see what you did in all these years and in these 2 reporting cycles. It's really great what you built up with the system and support also from the states. We see it in the great number of participants here and also in this webinar. I only can also support my pre-speakers in all the points they mentioned. And we are in the good position in Austria to have also this a lot of data, and that we are happy that the UN reporting is the last point in the queue, so that we only can put this data together and submit it to you, so that we are not in the position to build up new reporting systems or new data collecting systems for this, but only to gather all the available information and to aggregate it to submit it for the SDG 6 reporting. But on the other hand, there are also, I think, a lot of countries that have followed in the process before that where the reporting was the starting point, so the initial point to gather information, to collect information, for example, for SDG 6.3.2 quality reporting on water. This was also very great. So the UN system started the data reporting and data collection on water data. So this is the other side, to have the data already in place and to build up reporting systems. And what you managed was to bring all this together in this real great overview on a global level. So thank you very much for this. One last question that came up. What's the deadline for the voluntary assessment to submit it to you to have it useful for you in February?
Thanks, Ernst. So yeah, the deadline is 31st of January.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the last question, then we need to move on to the final segment. So I'd like to give the floor to Ditshupo Galbotse.
Yes, thank you very much. This was from National Statistics Office in Botswana. Mine is just on the role clarity between the focal point for the SDG 6 and the NSO overall SDG indicator coordinator. Because when I look at for instance, the voluntary assignment, who's going to take the lead? I had a brief discussion with the coordinator for the SDG indicators overall, but she also is not, she's not aware who's supposed to lead. So I just beg for role clarity between the two so that we don't get stuck. We didn't meet as a country before this meeting. Your suggestion was that the country's focal points could meet before this meeting to discuss, to have preliminary discussions, but we didn't. And I'm not very sure who's supposed to lead that process. I thank you.
Thanks. That is a great question, and I'm quite sure that you're not the only one asking it. And by the way, I'd be very interested to know the names of who you have for this other person you mentioned for Botswana, because we have not had a good contact in Botswana for a while. But that's beside the point. So you're absolutely right. For countries, and there'll be many of you who've never met before, it's going to be a bit of a challenge to track each other down. As Maria mentioned, we actually have lists. We have lists that we can share to tell you which focal points we are aware of. So that's your starting point. But what we found in the past where it can get tricky is that this idea of an overall coordination can be seen as being hierarchical. And it's not meant to be. I mean, in almost no cases is that person the superior of anybody else. It's just someone who's kind of volunteered to help pull things together and just keep things running smoothly. And it can be any of the focal points could take on this overall role. And we don't have any, the UN has no official rules. We have no official preference at all about who that overall person would be. And they can change. But what matters is that the group and the bureaucracy in the country kind of recognizes that role, and that will vary a lot from country to country. So the short of it is basically it's up to you to decide, and if there isn't one already, you can decide amongst yourselves who that person could be. I think you asked about the relation between the overall focal point and the NSOs. There's no official rule on this. All I can say is that the NSO is the official sign-off for the data for that country. So the country should not be submitting data to the UN until it's been, that the NSO is okay with that. And the members of the Interagency and Expert Group, the IAG of the UN, is made up of NSOs. That's the body that governs this entire process. But again, in practice, the involvement of the NSO varies a lot from country to country. Sometimes they have a very central role in the SDG 6 monitoring, and sometimes they're not actually involved at all, which is a shame. But I could imagine a situation where the NSO is the overall focal point. And to me, that is probably the best case. I mean, I think that is really good when that happens. But it really is up to the country to decide that. Okay, I need to wrap this up because I don't want to take away time from the next presentation. I'm sorry, Callis, I'm sorry that you're the one who's going to lose out, but if you have a question, maybe you can add it to the chat and we can follow up that way. So I would ask for no more questions on this for the moment. And I'd like to hand the floor over to our next presenter, who is Vanessa Vargas-Nguyen She comes to us from, she's a research scientist. She comes to us from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science in the United States. And she's going to take us through a presentation, a training on data use for communications. So thanks a lot. And Vanessa, I'll give you the floor. And Vanessa, you're still muted.
Right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to share my presentation shortly, so bear with me, please. All right. Can you all see my presentation? I hope so. So everyone, thank you so much, Will. Great presentation from you and Maria, and great questions. I really enjoyed being here with you today. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Vanessa Vargas-Nguyen from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today to talk about integrating narratives and visuals to communicate your data more effectively. So in this session, my goal is not only to share with you some basic principles and tools on how you can communicate your data or your work more effectively, but more importantly, I want to impart with you and share some insights on why that is important in developing environmental intelligence and environmental problem solving. And I'll start this presentation by sharing my own personal and professional experience in how I became very passionate about science communication and stakeholder engagement. I will introduce our group also, the Integration Application Network, which is a small organization that is part of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So I am originally from the Philippines, and I started my career in basic science and research. I've always been passionate about the environment. So I work as a marine scientist working on harmful algal blooms and microbial communities. And I've always believed that more science, more data will be able to help. And, coming from the Philippines, maybe if you have more technology, more research, you'll be able to solve environmental problems. But when I moved to the US, I realized we do have the same issues here. It's not always about technology or the lack thereof. The biggest commonality is the lack of effective science communication and integration. And this is I feel like the main topic as well of this activity. And the idea is really reinforced by the fact that environmental problems are social issues and that everything is connected. And what becomes really important is managing boundaries, which could be academic boundaries, organizational or geographical boundaries, while being able to create information that is salient, credible, and legitimate. What is needed are communication strategies that are stakeholder-driven and consider both the scientific information and the human perspective. So one such tools that we use at IAN is report cards that provide accessible and synthesized information to wider audiences, such as this Laguna de Bay Ecosystem Health Report Card and synthesis reports, such as these newsletters that we develop for Development Forum that I helped develop as part of the Integration Application Network. So the Integration Application Network of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science have popularized the use of report cards, facilitates their development, and teaches how to create them. I've been with IAN now for about nearly 7 years in various capacities, and we've been referred to as boundary spanning organizations, and we specializes in science communication and synthesis, social environmental report card development, stakeholder engagement, capacity building, and training. We also teach professional and graduate courses. One of my ongoing project right now is the development of massive open online courses. We offer a professional certificate course in the edX platform. And that's actually how Maria found us through the MOOC that we have at the edX platform. And the good thing about MOOCs is that all of these courses that you can see here are all free to audit. So if you want to learn more information about strategic science communication, you can go ahead and enroll, and it's free to audit. So our group's motto is to communicate better to empower change. And we advocate for that through the development of environmental intelligence, which we define as the ability to acquire and apply environmental knowledge. And the key to our application of the term is that it is the collective understanding that the community shares about the environment, not just what scientists understand. And we can visualize environmental intelligence in the form of this pyramid. At the base of this pyramid, we have the data gathering. The next layer is information generation, where the data are converted into usable information. And above this layer of the pyramid is knowledge building. Knowledge building occurs with synthesis efforts. It is facilitated through science communication, using data visualization techniques, which I will touch on later on in this presentation. And at the very top of the pyramid, communicating good science effectively in a timely manner is what creates environmental intelligence. And in order to achieve broad community knowledge, this communication needs to extend beyond the scientific literature to be more accessible to non-scientists. And putting this entire pyramid together, we can see that the degree of information synthesis increases with each of this layer. Example of this are environmental report cards that I've just mentioned previously. And they can span boundaries because they are able to provide accessible and synthesized information to wider audiences. And they're often cited as effective communication tools, and we see them as a top of the information pyramid that is supported by primary data analysis, but synthesized in a way that is easily understood by the public or decision makers. So report cards are increasingly being used globally. And what we found is that they do increase in environmental intelligence. From my own research, survey respondents strongly agreed or disagreed that their report cards increase public awareness, public education, political awareness, and demand for additional information. But report cards are more than a science communication product. The process of developing them is a great tool for stakeholder engagement and social environmental synthesis. This was the topic of my research on how science communication products can benefit both nature and society for a more sustainable future. Because if we take a social environmental system, which we all live in, we have the resource system, which are the environment, and a governance system, and they interact in this focal action situation. We need to consider both the environment, the natural world through natural sciences, and we also need to consider the social system or the human dimension through social sciences. And more importantly, we need to include stakeholder input. And the key principle that is needed to pull all this together is communication and engagement. So taking all together all this I've learned, and my current interest is now in social environmental problem solving through teaching capacity building, which I've already mentioned previously. And my research focus also is in social environmental governance. I have a current project ongoing that I'm coordinating and co-leading that involves the US, Philippines, Norway, Japan, and India. So for this goal of social environmental problem solving, which I know we all share, both science communication and stakeholder engagement is needed. The degree of stakeholder interaction may depend on the complexity of the issue, but what is consistently needed in all of these stages, be it outreach, collaboration, or co-production, is effective science communication. So I've been talking about science communication, but what is it really? If we look up the Wikipedia definition of it, it is the practice of informing, educating, sharing wonderment, and raising awareness of science-related topics. According to Burns in a research publication in 2003, It is the use of appropriate skills, media activities, and dialogue to produce awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and/or understanding of science. At Ian, we have a more functional definition, which is the successful dissemination of knowledge with a wide range of audience. And for us, the most important goal in communicating science is effectiveness. And to achieve this, what we need to first ask ourselves is, who am I communicating with? Who are our audience? Who are our stakeholders? This is important because even though the data, the monitoring results are the same, how you communicate them can vary depending to your audience and your goal. Here are some key steps in identifying stakeholders. First, before we even be able to identify the stakeholder, we have to know the context. What is the focus? What are the boundaries? Then we can apply different stakeholder methods where we identify stakeholders and what their stakes are, differentiate between them, and identify relationship. And by knowing this, we can design communication strategies and the type of engagement that would be needed. When designing these communication strategies, and I know this is part of your homework or assignments, we need to stop asking ourselves, what do I want to say? But we have to start asking ourselves, what do I need my audience to learn? So it's really about what the information that is needed by our audience, not exactly what we wanted them to know. And we can convey this information more effectively by using stories and visualizations. Humans have been telling stories before the written words, and ancient people drew pictures as far back as 40,000 years ago. And it's not only that storytelling and visualization are the most ancient forms of human communication. Our brains are actually hardwired to respond to stories and to visualization. There is a neurological basis for narrative. A narrative activates the brain, and it activates the brain in similar ways with different people. So it unifies the thinking of a group. Randy Olson, in his book, Houston, We Have a Narrative, describes in this image here, the magnetic resonance image, or MRI, of the brains of people watching videos in which their brains light up, and they do light up in the same way. And aside from that, effective science communication taps into the limbic system or emotional brain and the neocortex or thinking brain. The emotional brain affects our emotions, behavior, motivation, long-term memory. And while the thinking brain is related to our sensory perception, cognition, spatial reasoning, and language. So it is also important for us to think about and differentiate between the why and the what questions. Why addresses motivation and emotional content, and it goes to long-term memory, which is in the limbic system. And the what question addresses the cognitive and rational basis of an argument, which is our neocortex. So we do want this to be interactive. So with this knowledge in mind, I ask you to ask yourself these questions. Who are you communicating with? And I will put a link to a chat. If you're able to, please click on this link and you will go directly to this question that you see here on my PowerPoint on who are you communicating with? And please do use 1 to 2 words. And if you are going to be using your mobile device or other, like your cell phone, iPad, or another computer, you can go to the browser and type menti.com and use the code 5007-4684. And if you're not able to, you can also put them on the chat and I'll input it into the Menti format so it can be shown here. So I just wanted, Will, can you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the results pop up in my shared screen?
Yeah, it's going fine.
Great, thank you. So yeah, it looks like, yeah, thank you for all those who shared the responses. The public is the most common one. We have government agencies, practitioners, general public, ministers, scientists, experts, different stakeholders. So these are great. And like I said, if you can go to Menti, you can put it on the chat and I'll input those answers for you. Yes, and it is important to share our results with our family and friends as well. So I'll wait a few more seconds for some more results, but yeah, these are great answers. Thank you so much. So you can see that we do share a lot of, you do share a lot of common stakeholders and audiences, and they are very diverse, right? Okay, so thank you. And I will move on to another question. And this time, oops. Yep. So if you can just go to the next slide. And the question is, what do your audience need to learn? So this is like short text. Great, how amazing we are. That's great. People need to know that we are working hard, right? So again, Will, is the answer showing up? Fine, okay, great, thank you. Yes, it's important to know the progress or achieving SDG 6. Services are offered, so these are great. So yeah, like I said, you can also put things in the chat if it's easier. Yes, this is important that they are an integral part of the process. Importance and role of SDG 6 indicators. What they can do to help towards the goal. That's an important one too. Our quarantine efforts, that's a good one. Where progress is needed. So that's another important thing too. Yes, the quality of the water, great. The need for reporting. Okay, great. So yeah, these are important things that we have to think about in communicating science. So no data, no good decisions. That's good. The current status of water resources in our country and how to plan for the future. Okay, and also Ms. Radikani said on the chat that they have the solutions within themselves. So related water laws, regulation, policies, and plans. So great, thank you. Thank you for your participation. These are great answers. All right, so yeah, again, thanks for your participation. We have 2 or 3 more of those mentoring activities, so thank you so much. So summarizing some of the things that we just learned, first, science communication is the successful dissemination of knowledge to a wide range of audience. The goal is effectiveness. And we need to ask ourselves, what do I need my audience to learn? And finally, humans are hardwired for visuals and stories, and the why and the what questions affect our emotional brain and thinking brain, respectively. So next, I will touch on how to use narratives in science communication. So stories are a very powerful communication device. They're also more engaging and interesting than a string of facts. And in using narratives in science communication, I will share 5 basic principles that we use. So first, context is key. Address why your audience should care. I mentioned previously that effective science communication taps into the limbic system in the neocortex, and that we need to address both the what and the why question. However, as scientists, we often start with the what, then the how and the why, which may not always be effective. So ideally, you want to go the other way, which is to tell them first why, how, and what. Because in the primacy of addressing the why question, it gets into the limbic brain where emotion and behavior aspects are controlled, and then goes to the neocortex or analytical brain. And that's more effective to have that like causal effect in terms of communication. So second, using active titles are good to help guide audience and link with visuals. So active titles are short declarative statements that summarizes key message. And if written effectively, the audience should only need to read your active title and not the rest of your slide or your text document, especially if they don't have enough time and they're browsing through, it will get their attention and maybe read the whole thing. So verbs are described, are used to describe the results of a graph, maybe a map or figure. Those are the ones that are typically used. And the example, for instance, the second one here, seagrass and sediment characteristics were recorded, is more informative than just saying methods as the title of your slide. Ultimately, when we combine active titles with strong visual elements, it can lead to a more persuasive science communication product. Second, I want to advocate for this narrative structure that the ABT structure for using in developing your narrative template. So this is popularized by Randy Olson, who is a scientist and filmmaker, who has published 2 important books on narrative structure, which is called Houston, We Have a Narrative, Why Science Needs Stories. It was published in 2015. And this is where he introduced the concept of narrative structure. He defined 3 different kinds of narrative: the AAA, or the end structure, which is a little bit boring, right? It's just a very repetitive way of speaking. And he also introduced the DHY structure, or despite, however, yet, which can become very confusing and becomes overly narrative. So what he introduced as the most preferred way of speaking is and but therefore, which is much more interesting, and it creates a narrative structure. The ABT structure provides agreement using the end word, and which is the setup, things that we can all agree on. A contradiction, which is provided by the but, which is the problems that we are confronting. And finally, the consequences, or the therefore, accounts for probably the actions that are being taken, or it could be the solution itself. So as I introduced this section, I mentioned that stories are very powerful communication device, but they are because of three reasons. First, they engage the audience. Stories are far more interesting. They improve retention because they're easy to remember. We all have examples of good stories, and we actually remember them more because the stories were good. And finally, they shorten the reading time of the audience. A reader can quickly and easily follow a storyline with more effective comprehension. But what makes a good story? One thing that makes a good story is causality. You need to establish the cause and effect relationship. Another key element in a story is temporality, which is having a timeline with a beginning, a middle, and the end. The other important thing about good stories is that they share the people involved. The problem with science or other technical reporting is that we often focus on the data and the facts, and we leave out the people part. That's where we need to expand on the character development in telling scientific stories. Finally, stories need to be relevant to your audience. It is really important that your story makes a connection to your audience. And the hero's journey in the diagram here is a common template of storytelling. You can find them in all like movie plot lines where they involve a hero who goes on an adventure, is victorious in a decisive crisis, and comes home changed or somewhat transformed. So the process of creating a story for scientific material requires that scientists or data analysts distill information into a product that has a message, a story that's easy to follow, speak to the values of the audience, and things that are relevant to them. And it's a pleasurable experience. So they would be like interested in reading them. In other words, stories make science very accessible. And one tool that we can use is the message box. So this is from a science communication company called Compass, which can help you take the information you hold in your head about your work and communicate in a way that resonates with your chosen audience. So, you can start thinking about who your audience are, what are the issues, the problems, what are the benefits to your audience, so why do they need to know about it, and what are the potential solutions. So next, and I think we all know about this already, we all say that depending on our audience, we have to make sure that we simplify and define terms to avoid scientific jargon, but we don't have to dumb it down. Instead, we have to raise the bar. It's actually harder to simplify complex information in such a way that you retain what you want to say, right? Without losing the scientific value. So for instance, in this newsletter from Dasdi Island, which is a national park, part of the National Park Service in the US, you can see here that they have nice graphics, but they're able to explain the process of overwash in a simple term that includes some narratives. All right, so let's go back to our activity again, Menti. So if you still have the Menti on your phone, just click on go to slide or go to, just click the link that I have. So this is an ABT exercise suggested by Maria and Will. So I'll start with an and. Increasing wastewater treatment and improving water sanitation is important. But so if you can identify challenges in 2 to 3 words, please put them in Menti and appear once again. So Oh, it's very expensive. Good. It needs energy. Yep. Financial resources, all about money. Lack of finance, lack of public interest. Yeah, we need policy to make it happen. Need awareness. Technology also related to money and policy. So they're all interrelated. Great, so it all boils down to financial resources, technology, human resources, expertise, and they can all be made possible by influencing our policy and decision makers to make it happen. And you can do that by raising public awareness, like politicians, they respond to the public. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. So next, then we provided the but. So let's try to think about the therefore. So please identify the resolution in using 2 to 3 words. Right, politicians need to prioritize, prioritization, communication. So we need to be able to communicate our data more effectively so that the politician will be encouraged to prioritize wastewater treatment, improving sanitation. And Ms. Ratikani also put there in the chat, extensive stakeholder collaboration is needed. So I'll type it in. Okay, great. So raising awareness, having an inclusive approach, effective communication, developing policies. And these are all, we can all achieve that. Okay? But it's difficult. Right, again, thank you all for your participation. Okay, so on the chat also there's why it's important to tell the why it is important. Just being important is probably not sufficient. Great. Yep, exactly. So on the ABT structure, when you're trying to communicate this, you can expound that in the first part. Yeah, so we have to demonstrate benefits like in the why, answering the why. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so to summarize the narrative section part of this, my presentation, I presented why, some of the key principles in using narrative in science communication. First is showing the context, addressing the why your audience should care. Active titles can help you guide the audience and link with visuals. Using the narrative structure of ABT, the and but therefore template. Storytelling using cause and effect, timeline, and people can be a powerful tool. And simplifying and defining terms by avoiding jargon, but not dumbing it down, instead raising the bar of our communication. So using visuals in science communication can be very effective because as humans, we are visual creatures. So I will be presenting some principles in how we can use visuals in science communication. First, there is a diversity of visual elements that we can use for science communication. But remember that developing them deserve as much time and effort as text. So it's not just you put any photos or graphs there. We have to make sure that they are understandable and adds to the story that we're telling. So an example of visual, the most popular are photographs. An example is this aerial view of the Back River wastewater treatment plant here in Baltimore, Maryland. The key here though, and it's the same for all visual elements, is to make sure that you have the proper attribution or you have the right to use that image or graphic. So in this case, this photo is Creative Commons and you can download it to our website, en.umsys.edu, if you're interested in using images like this. So another common visual that we use are symbols, which are easily recognized and information rich. Symbols are language independent and universal. Nowadays, we even use icons or emojis to communicate in our daily lives, right? They can also represent something tangible, like for instance, a building, a deer, but they can also represent something invisible, like the water, the wind. Or maybe you can see water, but wind, and like affection, love, you can have some emotions for those kinds of things. And another form of visual element that we like to use is the conceptual diagram. And this is where we use different types of symbols and combine them together to form a conceptual diagram, which is a thought drawing that can be used to communicate complicated processes and environmental concepts in a simple and easy to digest format. For example, this is a conceptual diagram illustrating a modern central collection and wastewater treatment plant. It is, at first glance, it is easily understandable. You can, even for a non-engineer or a scientist, and you don't have to read like a long paragraph about it, but just at first glance, you can have an idea of what it does. Maps are another commonly used visual. So this is an example of a map of the Choptank River Basin here in the US. And it also shows the land use types that are in the different basin. And you can see just by the way the visualization was done that agriculture is the primary land use in this subbasin. Graphs are the form of visual that we're all familiar with. This is an example of a graph of total effluent flow and total nitrogen and total phosphorus loads at two wastewater treatment plants draining into the Choptank River, which is the image that I just showed you earlier. So videos are another form of visual elements. Just want to make sure. So videos are another form of visual elements, and they are great because they can convey a lot of information in a short amount of time, and you can reuse them too. So I will use a short clip from our online science communication course to explain the third principle in using visuals, which is eliminating extraneous information or chart junk.
I want to talk about chart junk, which can be defined as all visual elements in charts or graphs that are not necessary to comprehend the information represented on the graph and that distract the viewer from this information. I'll go through an example of a science visualization that has a lot of chart junk and how removing extraneous information can help make the visualization more effective. Starting out, a spreadsheet output of a bar chart with monthly rainfall is produced. A series of questions are posed. Is the background color necessary? If not, you can remove it. Second, are the grid lines necessary? If not, take them out. Are tick marks on the axes important? Tick marks are often important, but in this graph, the month is written below each bar, so the tick marks don't really add any value. Does a legend provide additional information? The legend only duplicates the labels on the x-axis, thus it's redundant. And since the graph provides the values, do they need to be written out? The viewer can read across the row to determine the value of the y-axis without the need of writing that figure down. And the border around the graph, is that necessary? The axes are crucial, but putting the whole graphic into a box isn't needed. So using these questions as a guide, this graphic can be significantly decluttered and improved.
All right, so that's eliminating extraneous information. And this is another example of that. And examples of eliminating chart junk such as the lines in this box. And it's also showing different ways of presenting the same information, which is the stream length condition in the different basins in the Mississippi River watershed. So from the initial graph that we use that's generated through Excel, you can clean it up to make it like a nicer bar graph. But you can also use more data visualization techniques and adding more graphics to improve it and make it more easily understandable. You can put it in a map, combine it with a map, change the bar graph into a pie chart. And it's just the same information, but presented in a different way. So the next principle is to take into consideration our cognitive responses to visuals. There are many aspects of visual elements, but for now, I'll just talk more specifically about colors, because understanding the psychological, social, and cultural perception of color can help inform your science communication design choices and make your work more effective at reaching your target audience. For instance, in this graphic, we use the stoplight color of red to stop, orange to wait, and green to go to indicate different type increasing risk. But of course, there are other considerations such as color blindness that we have to think about as well in using colors in our science communication products. So the next principle is that making sure that our visual are self-contained as possible. Like in this conceptual diagram, where the symbols are embedded in the caption, you don't need to read the whole text to understand what it's saying. And having supporting information embedded in a visual element is also preferred. Like in this map, the graphic that shows that includes the percentage of land cover in each sub-basin in the Upper Potomac. So similar to the Mississippi map earlier, there's a pie chart and there's colors and maps, and they're all contained in one visual element. So lastly, visual elements need to be fully integrated with the text. In developing science communication products, we want to be as concise as possible. No matter how good a visual element is, if it doesn't add to your story, then it's just another form of clutter. So make sure that if you include a graphic, you reference that in your text. All right, so let's go back to our Menti. And the question is, what are the challenges in incorporating these visuals? And this is a short answer type of questions again. So think about what are the challenges in incorporating visuals. And there are different forms of visuals, like I mentioned before. Right, so need external support to get them very professional. The size of the documents, that's true. Depending on the kinds of science communication product that you're using, the way you use visuals can be limited, and it takes time and effort. They need to be clear, right? So no doubts in interpretation, finding the most meaningful chart, suitable chart, having programs that's true. And we feel that's also one of what we found working with different partners, is that sometimes we use the Adobe products and they can be a little proprietary. So you need people to have this subscription to those things. The presentation format, too much information to present in one visual. That's really very challenging. So that's why when you see all these conceptual diagrams that we use, it's not done in one go. It actually undergoes a lot of repetition, communication drafts, and including all the key is removing what's not needed. And sometimes we think that everything is needed, but actually they're not. And depending on like different people, they have different things, opinions of what is important. Yeah, so it's very challenging to visualize highly complex data sets. May need to kill your darlings. What does that mean? Okay, so you need expertise and focus. Need graphic designers, not necessarily, because there are simple ways where you can make graphics more appealing. And again, could you be just as simple as removing those chart junks, right? We can easily do that in Excel. Yep, supporting tools, skills, taking too much time. So it all depends on the kind of science communication product that you're using. All right, so thanks everyone for your participation. So just to summarize this point, in using visuals in science communication, I've shown that there are a diversity of visual elements that can enhance science communication. We need to eliminate extraneous information such as chart junk or map clutter. We have to take into consideration our cognitive response to different visuals. Self-contained visuals with supporting information is preferred. And we need visuals to be more fully integrated with the data. So in the next few slides, I will talk about specific tools you can use in communicating your data. First is data visualization, and I will show this short video again to talk about it more in depth.
The goal and rationale for data visualization is to communicate information both clearly and efficiently. You can use a variety of different graphs and plots and information graphs and tables and charts and maps to communicate information. An effective visualization helps you uncover trends, realize insights, explore sources, and ultimately tell stories. Effective science communication using visualization can make complex data more accessible, more understandable, and ultimately more usable. There are a myriad of choices for data visualization. There are XY graphs and tables and pie charts and bar graphs and Venn diagrams and timelines and scatter plots, bubble diagrams, histograms, area charts, and more. There are combinations of data graphs with maps and with conceptual diagrams and with photographs. The real challenge is to choose the appropriate visualization for the data that you're communicating. Good data visualization combines function and form. In terms of function, this is about choosing the visualization type that best conveys the characteristics of the data. Then the form is when you apply color and choose your fonts and other design elements to help guide the user to help make your data understandable. Here are some examples. 1, The functional output is a bar graph of some responses to treatments, and the form is applied to simplify the color scheme, match the color intensities to the treatment temperature, and declutter the graphics, adding an active title and a symbol of the species being assessed. Second example is a functional output of an XY graph, seasonality of 2 different seagrasses. The form is when you add the colors and symbols, increase the font size of the legends, and include an active title. Third example is a pie chart of land use, initially generated with different land use types that are kind of obfuscated because it's obliquely angled. It's colorful, but it doesn't give you information. So rather a bar graph with actual percentages of land uses are displayed. 4, tables also need careful formatting and attention to detail. A table with several treatments over a time course doesn't provide much information without a significant accompanying explanation. So what you can do is create better descriptions, defining the error bars, using alignment rather than color banding, creating a table that has much more explanatory power. It's cleaner and it's easier to read. From these examples, you can see that combining function and form leads to a better data visualization graphic. Most data visualizations are created using an iterative process. You can start out with a simple printout of a data table that comes from a spreadsheet. This table without any formatting is difficult to interpret. Some simple formatting by centering the data in the column headers helps, but what really makes this table work is when it's decluttered by removing all vertical lines and most of the horizontal lines, and allowing the alignment to serve as guides to the rows and columns. The locations are spelled out, and instead of using abbreviations, use a symbol for each organism to make it easy to quickly understand what it is. That resulting table is more compelling and more self-explanatory than the initial spreadsheet-generated version.
All right, so that's for different data visualizations. Visualizations can also be used as an effective way to communicate or present qualitative information or data. In this example, I created a visualization of what a future Chesapeake Bay looked like based on interviews that I did with key stakeholders. Note that I used text and images together to convey specific key points, and I also use animation to present these results, because if I just show it as a graphic in a presentation type format, it won't be as effective. And so there are, as much as there's a lot of different data visualizations, there's a lot of types of science communication products as well. One of them is posters, and Bill will mention this earlier. Some of the advantages that it can potentially reach a large audience, but the challenges could be expensive to print, difficult to transport, and very time intensive. Another example is a newsletter and fact sheets. Advantage is it could be relatively quick to produce and easy for broad audience to consume, but the challenge is the limited space availability, and they can also be viewed as a marketing tool. So I mentioned report cards earlier. I'm just going to show quickly some specific example. We developed a report card for the Mississippi River watershed. And if we follow the information pyramid that I showed earlier, this report card is supported by a lot of primary data, and a lot of different science communication products were also created. The report card was able to synthesize different information from different sectors, such as recreation, ecosystem, flood control, water supply, economy, and transportation. And we were able to convene stakeholders from those different sectors. And through the process, we also were able to identify knowledge gaps. Another report cards that we generate here every year, actually since 2006, is the Chesapeake Bay report card. And every time we release them, we have a press event, and it generates millions of media impressions during the event, just the release event itself. So in this last release event, we also released a newsletter on an environmental justice index for the Chesapeake Bay, which is a product of our class that I taught early this year. We use different visual elements, short narratives. And in this section of indicator description, we actually asked the students to use the ABT framework to develop their indicator description. So they were able to create narratives that are short that can go into this newsletter. So after the release events, my co-instructor and I are actually, and one of our students was invited by our state senator to talk about the report card in his Facebook Live event. So a news article was actually written about that. And that just shows you that when you have like effective science communication, you can be able to really reach your target audience, which can include your politicians and things like that. Right, so in terms of time, I'll skip this, but just to wrap up, the important points to remember, I hope you got from this presentation is that developing environmental intelligence and solving environmental problems require effective communication and engagement. Science communication is defined as the successful dissemination of knowledge to a wide range of audience, including non-scientists. Effective science communications uses storytelling, context visualization, and synthesis. And science communication can be done in a variety of ways. So thank you so much for your participation. If you have any questions, you can email me. You can go to our website. You want more information. As I said, you can sign up if you want to learn more about strategic science communication and developing report cards. These are free to audit on the edX platform. So yeah, we don't have much time, but I give back to you, Will, to wrap up the workshop.
Thanks a lot, Vanessa. That was really great, and I think two of those things that really spoke to me. One was the comment about you call it chart clutter. Was that the term you used? But I've seen so many visuals that just try to do too much and make it too pretty, and you just get lost in it. And so I took a lesson from that. But also this point about making sure that you reference any figures in the written text. I've seen that happen quite a lot, where there's a graph in a report that there's no reference to it. We don't know what the point is. So there's a lot of great stuff in here. So look, we are already a couple minutes over time, so I don't think we really have time to have discussion about this. But I would just point out that this program, these online courses that Vanessa was referring to, this is something that's an ongoing offering, I hope, from the University of Maryland. So this is something that maybe you guys, the participants here, might be interested in checking out for the future. So bringing us back now to the voluntary country assignments, that fourth question that I showed you about communications examples. It would be great to see what you have from your work that you think is a good example of communications, or maybe a bad example. If you've got one that you realize now maybe is lacking in some way and you want to share that as a lesson, that would be really interesting for us. So if you choose to answer that fourth question, think about the sort of things that Vanessa shared with us today. And as I mentioned in the session 3 in February, Vanessa or maybe her colleague will be back with us to show some of the examples that you've shared with us and give some feedback on those as well. Kind of trying to go full circle on this communications exercise. So with that, I would like to wrap this up. Just going to share my screen for a second here. So I'd like to wrap up this kickoff session. Just a reminder that we have 3 more sessions in February. That's the 8th, 9th, and 10th of February. They'll be offered both in the morning and in the afternoon, European time, with the same language translation. So I really hope to see you all there. And of course, I really hope that you will consider completing the voluntary assignment in the country teams, and we are available for you if you have any question about the assignment itself or about the country teams. And finally, just one last plug that you have all received a link from us about this online survey for this midterm evaluation of IMI. It takes literally 10 minutes, maybe even 5 minutes to complete these questions. It's super fast, but it'll be really helpful for us to complete it if you haven't already. And with that, I'd like to thank you, wish you all a great remainder of your day, and hope that I will see you all in the beginning of February. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you and
Bye.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice
Bye-bye.
day.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
thank you.
Leave me.